Before we get into anything today, we need to start this deep dive with a very clear, immediate disclaimer for you, the listener.
Right.
We are not taking sides in this conflict. What you're going to hear is strategic analysis drawn strictly from academic sources, established geopolitical frameworks, and verified reporting.
Yeah, we are not a political channel. We're not a propaganda channel.
Exactly. We are here to analyze, not to advocate.
And, the foundation of the analysis we're unpacking today is built on a very specific, exhaustive framework. It was developed by Professor Jiang, who is a specialist in game theory.
Right.
He applies the exact mathematical and strategic models that military planners use to map out the cascading consequences of this kind of conflict.
Yeah.
So this isn't about ideological preference. It's just a clinical look at asymmetric attrition and strategic geography.
World War III has started.
Yeah.
The United States and Israel have attacked Iran. We are currently in the 5th day of this war. And if you look at the broad sweep of history, there's this pattern that repeats with absolute reliability. Every single great empire falls.
The Romans, the Persians.
The British, the Ottomans.
Yeah.
All of them. And the collapse almost never begins when they're weak. It begins at the exact moment when the empire feels most invincible.
Most overconfident.
Right. The mistake that unravels everything invariably comes when a hegemon believes it can project power anywhere, at any time, without facing any existential consequence.
And this war, the one we are currently 5 days into, might be that exact fabled miscalculation for American hegemony.
Yeah.
Because the conclusion drawn from the strategic frameworks we're looking at today is remarkably stark. The United States may actually find itself on the losing side of this war.
Which sounds crazy to say out loud.
It does, but the underlying reasons for that trajectory have absolutely nothing to do with the mainstream news narratives you're seeing.
Right, the stuff focusing on troop counts or conventional technological superiority.
Exactly.
So the implication here is that this could represent the biggest strategic blunder in modern American history.
Without a doubt.
To understand how we get to that conclusion, we really have to bypass the rhetoric and look at the physical reality on the ground right now.
Yeah, let's look at the first 24 hours.
The sheer scale of the kinetic action was staggering. We're talking Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Doha, Bahrain, Kuwait.
All of them sustained strikes.
All of them. And Dubai specifically, I mean, this is a node of global commerce. It has the busiest international airport on the planet.
Or it did.
Right, it did. Because the data suggests that after the single weekend, Dubai's viability as a long-term, stable financial hub is essentially finished.
It's a complete paradigm shift in global risk assessment. We're looking at verified reports of structural physical damage to Dubai's main airport terminal from aerial strikes.
And across 7 major regional airports, over 21,300 flights were instantly canceled.
21,300.
Yeah.
When you model that out, it's not simply a delay in transit. It is a hard cessation of movement. That number of cancellations cascading through the global logistics network. It strands cargo, it grounds flight crews, and it permanently alters the routing algorithms of every major international carrier.
But the structural damage is almost secondary, right? The demographic reaction is the actual metric of collapse here.
Oh, absolutely.
Given Dubai's demographic makeup, where 90% of the population consists of an expatriate workforce.
An expat workforce entirely devoid of nationalistic loyalty to the UAE.
Exactly. So capital flight is instantaneous. We're seeing verified reports of wealthy individuals paying up to $250,000 just to secure a single seat on the few private or chartered flights making it out.
That $250,000 premium is literally the price of panic. It's driven by the fundamental psychology of the expatriate class.
Right.
Because in game theory, you always analyze the incentive structures of the actors involved.
Yeah.
This demographic has zero incentive to stay and weather a geopolitical storm.
Why would they?
Exactly. They are highly mobile. They hold liquid assets. When the foundational promise of safety is breached, they relocate.
They flew.
They shift their capital, their corporate headquarters, and their families to Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo.
And that capital rarely, if ever, returns. Dubai spent decades meticulously cultivating this aura of impenetrable security to attract that wealth.
And that aura was entirely obliterated in 48 hours.
But let me push back on the strategic logic here for a second, because you as the listener might be wondering this too.
Sure.
If you are Iran looking at the board, Why target these Gulf states to begin with? The mainstream perception is that places like the UAE or Qatar are essentially neutral economic zones.
Right.
So why invite the international condemnation of striking Dubai or Bahrain?
Because under the rigid definitions of military strategy and game theory, they are not neutral.
Okay, unpack that.
The concept of neutrality evaporates the very moment your sovereign territory is utilized to facilitate offensive operations against a foreign state.
Ah, right.
The United States Fifth Fleet headquarters is located in Bahrain.
And that specific headquarters was struck.
It's exactly. Furthermore, these Gulf states permit their airspace to be traversed for incoming strikes directed at Iranian targets.
So by definition,
By definition, if you allow your territory to serve as a staging ground, a logistics hub, or a flight corridor for an adversary, the strategic model categorizes you as an active combatant.
wow. And the moment they transition from safe havens to active combatants, their deep geographical vulnerabilities are just laid bare.
Completely exposed.
The resource deficit in these nations is mathematically terrifying when you remove the protective bubble of peacetime commerce. These are hyper-arid desert nations.
They import 80% of their food.
80%. But the food isn't even the most critical failure point. It's the water.
The water math is apocalyptic.
The calculus on Dubai's water consumption shows they use 17,000% more water than they naturally possess.
Just think about the sheer scale of that deficit.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
For every single liter of water that Dubai can naturally extract from its own groundwater or minimal rainfall, it requires an artificial injection of 170 additional liters just to maintain baseline municipal functionality.
It's a completely synthetic oasis.
Exactly. The margins for error are non-existent. And it's not just Dubai. Bahrain operates at nearly 4,000% water deficit. Saudi Arabia is at 883%.
And that artificial injection comes from one place.
Desalination.
Right. We are talking about massive, highly complex industrial facilities situated right on the coastline, pulling in seawater and filtering it.
And those plants account for 60% of the entire Gulf region's freshwater supply.
Which makes them the ultimate strategic Achilles heel.
From a targeting perspective, desalination plants are enormous, they are stationary, and they are inherently fragile.
Because of the filtration systems.
Right. They rely on delicate reverse osmosis membranes, continuous high-voltage power grids, and completely exposed intake pipes.
So a low-yield, $50,000 loitering munition, a cheap drone, can trigger a catastrophic failure in a multi-billion-dollar facility.
Easily. And the strategic implication is grim. If a coordinated swarm takes those coastal plants offline, you're looking at millions of organized citizens stranded in a high-temperature desert environment.
With what, maybe a few days of water?
A hard cap of perhaps 3 to 4 days of municipal water reserves.
Which means it transitions from a military problem to a terminal humanitarian catastrophe almost immediately.
Within a week.
Which perfectly transitions us into the economic mechanics of this conflict, specifically the cost asymmetry. You mentioned a $50,000 drone.
Right.
When I look at the American defense posture, I'm thinking of the most advanced, highly funded anti-air networks on the planet. We have Patriot batteries, we have the TED system.
Yeah.
Are you saying these multi-billion-dollar state-of-the-art defense grids are fundamentally inadequate here?
I'm saying they are not technologically inadequate, they're economically unsustainable.
Okay.
Which, in a war of attrition, is exactly the same thing.
That's a huge distinction.
It is the single most critical number in the war. This is a classic asymmetric war of attrition model. Let's look at the offensive ledger first.
Okay.
Iran is heavily utilizing variations of their Shahed drone platform. The unit cost for these assets sits between $35,000 and $50,000.
So extremely cheap in military terms.
Basically disposable. They require minimal manufacturing sophistication. Iran produces an estimated 500 of them per day.
500 a day.
Every day. And their stockpiles are verified at roughly 80,000 units.
Wow.
Furthermore, they don't require localized, vulnerable air bases. A swarm can be launched from the back of a commercial flatbed truck in a remote valley anywhere in the country.
And we saw that immediately. During the initial strikes on the UAE alone, the volley consisted of 189 ballistic missiles, 941 drones, and 3 cruise missiles.
Right, so map that against the defensive ledger.
The United States relies on systems like Kuwait Terminal High Altitude Area Defense to protect these critical nodes. And the technology is phenomenal, right? It's capable of hitting a bullet with a bullet in the upper atmosphere.
It is a marvel of engineering. But The interceptors fired by Dayad cost roughly $1 million each.
$1 million per missile.
And that is where the mathematical model of the conflict breaks the American strategy. Because in a kinetic interception, a 1-to-1 kill ratio is a statistical impossibility.
You can't just fire one and assume it hits.
Standard doctrine often requires firing 2, sometimes 3 interceptors at a single incoming threat, just to ensure a high probability kill.
So wait, you are expending $2 to $3 million to neutralize a $50,000 piece of fiberglass and a commercial-grade engine.
Exactly. Even if we grant a theoretical scenario of a 100% interception rate, which never happens, you are forcing the defending power to spend 20 to 60 times more capital than the attacking power.
So the adversary's objective isn't necessarily to blow up the base.
Right.
It's to force you to empty your treasury defending the base. You don't win this war. You just go bankrupt fighting it.
Precisely. No sovereign treasury, not even the United States, can sustain a defensive posture where the enemy continually forces a 60-to-1 negative expenditure ratio using off-the-shelf components.
And the realization of this mathematical trap is already sending massive shockwaves through the global financial sector, right?
The immediate financial fallout is staggering.
The institutions that underwrite global commerce are looking at the vulnerability of the Gulf's infrastructure against this exact cost asymmetry, and they are aggressively pulling back.
Marine and energy insurers are entirely withdrawing from the Middle East. They are outright refusing to cover war risks for assets in the region.
Which means ships don't move.
Exactly. The immediate symptom of that insurance withdrawal is the astronomical spike in shipping costs. Supertanker freight rates, the literal cost of chartering a vessel to move crude oil by sea, skyrocketed by 94% in a single day.
94% in 24 hours.
The data shows rates hitting an unprecedented all-time record of over $423,736 per day.
Just to rent the boat.
That is just the baseline cost to keep the ship moving, before accounting for the actual commodity it carries.
Because the risk premium has become monumental. Insurers utilize these exact same game theory matrices to determine probability.
And the probability of a tanker safely navigating these waters has plummeted, which brings us to the core geopolitical reality of this conflict.
Right, because if you strip away the advanced weaponry, the political rhetoric, and the complex financial models, the outcome of this war is dictated by one immutable factor.
Geography.
Geography decides everything. I want you, the listener, to visualize the topographical map of this theater for a second. Let's put aside the weapons and the politics.
Just look at the physical map.
On the eastern flank, you have Iran. And geographically, Iran functions as a continental fortress.
The natural defense is unparalleled.
The Zagros Mountains run along its western and southern borders, presenting a massive, deeply rugged, and highly complex terrain.
And Iran has spent decades, literally decades, boring into this mountain range.
Establishing subterranean rocket bases, drone launch facilities, missile batteries deep inside valleys, and reinforced cave networks.
The strategic advantage of that topography cannot be overstated. By burying their kinetic capabilities beneath hundreds of feet of solid rock, they render them practically invisible to Western orbital satellite surveillance.
You can't hit what you can't see.
And furthermore, they are completely insulated from conventional ground incursions. This isn't a modern adaptation.
Right.
This specific natural fortress has successfully shielded civilizations on the Iranian plateau from external conquest for millennia.
Okay, now overlay that impregnable mountain fortress against the geography on the other side of the map. The Gulf states.
The glass house.
It is exactly a glass house. The topography is completely flat, featureless, open desert. The critical infrastructure we discussed, the oil extraction fields, the massive coastal desalination plants, the international airports, the sprawling American military bases.
They sit completely exposed.
There is zero natural cover. It is the ultimate topographical mismatch. A fortified subterranean mountain range staring down at an exposed, flat desert basin.
And the conduit separating these two vastly unequal topographies is the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is the most important waterway on Earth right now.
It's a maritime choke point, merely 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point.
Just 33 kilometers?
To put that scale into perspective, 33 kilometers is a distance that endurance athletes can physically swim across.
Wow.
Yet, it serves as the most critical central artery for global energy markets.
We really need to unpack its global importance, because 20% of the entire global supply of petroleum passes through the strait every single day.
And the national dependencies tied to that specific channel are staggering.
Let's run the numbers. India relies on the strait for 60% of its oil imports.
China, the second largest economy on Earth, depends on it for 40%.
And Japan is relying on it for 75% of its entire energy intake.
The vulnerability is so acute that the Japanese Prime Minister actually issued a stark, clinical public statement assessing their national risk.
Right.
He explicitly stated that if the Strait of Hormuz were to close, the Japanese nation would exhaust its strategic petroleum reserves in exactly 8 to 9 months.
8 to 9 months until they run out of oil completely.
And following that exhaustion, their entire industrialized economy would face a hard collapse.
And the terrifying reality of the current situation is that, functionally speaking, the strait is already closed.
It is effectively impassable right now.
Immediately following the initiation of the conflict, commercial maritime traffic dropped by 70%, and as of today, transit is sitting at near zero.
The energy markets reacted instantly. Brent crude spiked nearly 10% overnight. Macroeconomic analysts at institutions like Barclays and Bank of America are already forecasting crude oil to breach the $100 per barrel mark,
With potential for far higher spikes if the closure sustains.
which it likely will. We've seen political maneuvers attempting to project stability and control over the waterway.
Like the announcement by Donald Trump that the United States Navy would provide armed escorts for commercial oil tankers attempting the transit.
Right, but from a purely geographic and tactical standpoint, a naval escort is largely theater here.
Explain that.
You cannot effectively shield a massive, slow-moving, unarmored supertanker while navigating a 33-kilometer channel when the mountain range towering directly above that channel is seeded with tens of thousands of cheap anti-ship cruise missiles and loitering drone swarms.
You just can't intercept all of them.
It's mathematically impossible. The airspace and the littoral waters are entirely contested. In fact, a recent Pentagon briefing confirmed a kinetic naval exchange where a U.S. submarine sank an Iranian warship in the Indian Ocean.
So the naval theater is highly active,
Highly active, and the strait remains impassable.
which really forces us to reevaluate the entire premise of the war. Because we've spent time analyzing military tactics, topographies, and munitions. But the underlying strategy indicates this war isn't fundamentally about destroying military assets at all.
No, it's not.
It's a targeted strike against the macroeconomic engine that powers the American empire.
And to understand the lethality of that strategy, we have to meticulously map out the petrodollar loop.
Let's pivot to that because this is the underlying financial engine of the whole conflict.
Right. This is the closed-circuit financial system established in the 1970s that actually underpins modern American global hegemony.
It functions like a physiological cardiovascular system.
Exactly. So let's map out the cycle. First, the Gulf states extract vast quantities of petroleum and export it to the global market.
But they price and execute those sales exclusively in United States dollars.
Right. So once the Gulf states accumulate these massive reserves of U.S. dollars from the global energy trade, they recycle that capital right back into the American financial system.
They invest those dollars into the U.S. stock market.
Heavily. They are among the most significant sovereign investors in U.S. equities, backing the tech conglomerates, your NVIDIAs, Microsofts, Googles, and Apples.
And they buy U.S. Treasury bonds.
Exactly. So that continuous massive influx of recycled Gulf capital artificially strengthens the U.S. economy and subsidizes American debt.
Which funds the U.S. economy.
And a robust U.S. economy generates the immense tax revenue required to fund a global, multi-trillion-dollar military apparatus.
Which then funds the U.S. military.
Right. And that same military apparatus is then deployed to the Middle East, establishing the base infrastructure we discussed earlier to provide physical security for the Gulf states,
Which protects the Gulf states.
who ensure they remain in power and continue selling their petroleum exclusively in U.S. dollars.
It is an exquisitely balanced, self-sustaining feedback loop.
Until an external force severs the primary artery.
And this is where the brilliance, and I use that word purely analytically, the brilliance of Iran's strategy becomes clear. By utilizing their geographic advantage to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, they ensure the Gulf states physically cannot export their petroleum.
And if the oil cannot leave the Persian Gulf, the influx of U.S. dollars to those states halts.
If the petrodollar accumulation halts, the Gulf's massive continuous reinvestment into American financial markets dries up.
The U.S. stock market, deprived of one of its largest capital inflows, faces a profound liquidity crisis.
The broader American economy weakens.
Suddenly, the domestic economic engine required to fund a globally deployed military comes under immense, potentially unsustainable pressure.
It cripples America's ability to fund the war.
Exactly. Iran's grand strategy does not require them to defeat the United States Navy or Air Force in a direct, symmetrical confrontation.
They just have to close a tiny strip of water.
They merely need to enforce a blockade on a 33-kilometer stretch of water long enough for the resultant macroeconomic damage within the United States to become self-sustaining.
It fundamentally attacks the illusion of empire, because an empire runs on an aura of invincibility.
We really need to go deep into the philosophy of power here. A global empire doesn't maintain control solely through the physical deployment of troops and armor.
Right.
It maintains control through an aura of absolute invincibility. Fear generates obedience.
It generates currency dominance and military hosting. If the global community fears your capabilities, they conform to your systems.
They trade in your fiat currency, they permit the construction of your military installations on their sovereign soil, and they purchase your sovereign debt.
But that aura of invincibility is a psychological construct, and it's incredibly fragile. Look at the cracks we're already seeing.
The shattered illusion.
The U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain struck. Dubai airport damaged.
Trillion-dollar defenses failing against cheap drones.
When the global community sees a swarm of $50,000 disposable drones bypass a billion-dollar missile defense grid, the psychological construct fractures.
And historical precedent shows us that once that illusion of supreme capability cracks, it cannot be retroactively repaired.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
The global community begins to slowly realize that the emperor has no clothes. The perceived risks of defying the hegemon drop, while the costs of aligning with it rise.
That is the exact mechanism by which empires enter their terminal decline.
Which forces us to examine the socio-cultural dimension of this war.
This is a factor entirely misunderstood by Western audiences.
Completely misunderstood.
Yeah.
We are analyzing this conflict through the sterile lenses of geopolitics, cost-benefit matrices, and macroeconomic loops. But for Iran...
This is a religious war. It is a jihad.
Yes. To accurately predict Iran's behavior and risk tolerance, you must understand their foundational identity.
Iran's population is overwhelmingly Shia Muslim.
And within the broader Islamic world, the Shia are a distinct minority. They comprise roughly 10% of all Muslims globally.
For 1,400 years, their entire cultural and theological identity has been defined by their status as a persecuted, resilient minority.
Exactly. And embedded at the absolute core of their theology is the concept of martyrdom.
The willingness to sacrifice oneself for the preservation of the faith is not just honored. It is the highest achievable spiritual ideal.
Which brings us to the kinetic events of the opening hours of this conflict, and what may ultimately be recorded as the most catastrophic miscalculation of the entire war.
The decapitation mistake.
The United States and Israel executed a decapitation strike, resulting in the death of the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei.
Let's detail the clinical facts surrounding that specific strike.
Right.
The Ayatollah was 86 years old. Intelligence reports indicated he was suffering from advanced prostate cancer.
When the hostilities commenced, he possessed every logistical means to evacuate.
He could have boarded a flight to Moscow, established a government in exile, and lived out his remaining time in relative security.
Instead, he made the deliberate choice to remain in Tehran.
He was killed in the subsequent airstrikes, dying alongside his daughter, his son-in-law, and his grandchildren.
The divergence in how this event was processed is just staggering.
From the Western strategic perspective, this was celebrated. A massive, quantifiable victory.
A devastating, crippling blow that successfully eliminated the apex node, the enemy's command hierarchy.
But the Iranian domestic reality processed the event in the exact opposite manner. It was a massive backfire.
Within the Iranian cultural and religious framework, this was instantly elevated to the greatest act of martyrdom in modern Shia history.
State media framed it as a leader dying for his people, and they didn't even have to spin the narrative.
The raw facts aligned perfectly with their deepest cultural archetypes. Their supreme leader didn't flee. He intentionally remained and shared the fate of his people.
By executing that strike, the U.S. and Israel did not shatter the Iranian command structure's morale.
No, they inadvertently unified the entire global Shia population with a sacred, unshakable religious obligation to avenge his death.
That single act unified every Shia Muslim globally. The exact kinetic action intended to cripple the state provided them with the most potent, unifying ideological force imaginable.
And Iranian military planners clearly anticipated this exact scenario.
Let's explain their immediate response. Total war with a decentralized regional command structure.
Right. Their operational response was not the paralysis or chaos typical of a decapitated command structure. It was a seamless, pre-planned pivot.
Because they mapped out the vulnerability of Tehran long before the first missile was fired. The authority has been decentralized.
Every regional command center, every subterranean base in the Zagros Mountains now operates on its own distinct chain of command with localized strategic objectives.
You could systematically flatten Tehran, and the Iranian kinetic war machine would continue to operate largely unhindered from 1,000 dispersed, hardened locations across a landmass that is 3 times the size of Iraq.
And here we encounter the profound tragic irony of the current bombing campaign.
Yeah, this is cruel. If we look at the demographics of the casualties, sources confirm over 1,000 individuals killed within Iran from U.S. and Israeli strikes thus far. We have to ask who is actually dying in these urban centers like Tehran, Isfahan, and Shiraz.
It is the educated, urbanized, progressive demographic.
These are the university students, the professionals, the exact segments of the population who might have welcomed regime change.
In a different geopolitical timeline, these are the very individuals who have historically protested the hardline regime, who might have been receptive to Western diplomatic overtures.
But because they're concentrated in the urban centers being targeted, they're the ones trapped beneath the rubble.
Meanwhile, the religious hardliners, the ideologically entrenched Shia militants who are genuinely committed to fighting a multi-generational war of attrition, where are they?
They're dispersed throughout the rural provinces.
They are manning the deep subterranean bases in the mountains. They remain virtually untouched by the urban bombing campaign.
We're actively neutralizing the only demographic that could potentially serve as an internal moderating force, while leaving the most dangerous committed elements of the adversary perfectly intact.
It is a brutal historical trap, and the analysis suggests America is walking blindly into it once again.
Draw the parallels to Iraq and Afghanistan here.
It's the exact same systemic failure of strategic vision. The American military apparatus possesses an unmatched capacity to win the opening salvos of a conflict.
It excels at winning the opening battle.
It can deconstruct physical infrastructure and eliminate specific high-value targets with terrifying precision.
But it fails at winning the ensuing war.
It demonstrates a consistent, documented inability to secure victory in protracted, irregular wars. It repeats the fatal mistake of believing superior conventional firepower equals strategic victory.
Particularly when engaging an insurgency fueled by profound religious conviction.
Exactly, which forces us to analyze the endgame scenarios.
This is where it gets incredibly dark. How does a conflict with these parameters actually conclude? Because both the Western coalition and the Iranian state are operating on grand strategic designs.
And clinically speaking, the implications of both strategies are severe and highly destabilizing on a global scale. Let us first examine the unannounced strategic objective of the United States and Israel.
This is a terrifying unannounced strategy to essentially destroy Iran as a coherent nation.
It's a strategic blueprint that is rarely articulated in public forums because it lacks any acceptable moral or diplomatic justification. But from a purely clinical geopolitical standpoint, the objective is the systemic balkanization of the Iranian state.
You have to look at the demographic map of Iran. It is not a monolith. It is highly ethnically diverse.
You have the ethnic Persians concentrated in the Central Plateau, but they are flanked by distinct ethnic minority groups along the border regions.
The Kurds in the northwest.
The Azeris, the Balakis in the southeast.
The Arabs in the southwest.
Many of these peripheral ethnic groups possess stronger historical and cultural ties to populations in neighboring countries than they do to the central authority in Tehran.
So the Western strategy is designed to exploit these fractures.
The plan is to systematically degrade the central infrastructure, specifically destroying the water and power grids, while simultaneously arming, funding, and providing logistical support to separatist movements within these ethnic enclaves.
The ultimate goal is to fracture the country along ethnic lines, fund breakaway regions, and keep them fighting each other over water permanently.
You ensure Iran is permanently fragmented, permanently weak, and completely consumed by a multi-front civil war, entirely neutralizing their capacity to project power across the broader Middle East.
But we have to point out the absolute lack of moral justification here. You're talking about intentionally tearing apart one of Earth's oldest civilizations just to secure regional hegemony.
It is a strategy of engineered systemic collapse. It carries immense humanitarian and ethical implications.
Which will undoubtedly isolate the United States in the eyes of the global South.
But when we pivot to examine Iran's counterstrategy, we find a blueprint that is equally ambitious.
And potentially far more globally disruptive.
They are operating on a doctrine that could be categorized as Pax Islamica.
Iran's strategic vision extends far beyond its own borders. They are looking at the entire demographic map of the Muslim world, which encompasses roughly 2 billion people.
A significant portion of that population resides in nations governed by authoritarian, highly unpopular dictatorships.
State like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, U.S. client states.
Right. And from Iran's perspective, these regimes maintain their power largely through their status as client states heavily subsidized by the American security umbrella.
So Iran's strategic counteroffensive aims to rally those populations to overthrow their rulers.
They are attempting to bypass the state apparatuses entirely and broadcast their narrative directly to those 2 billion people. The objective is to catalyze mass populist uprisings and forge a unified anti-Western Islamic bloc.
And they are purposefully transcending the Sunni-Shia divide to do this.
They are leveraging the martyrdom of their leadership to rally the entirety of the Muslim world against Western hegemony.
And the first dominoes are already falling. We are currently witnessing uprisings.
We have verified reports of massive crowds, primarily Shia populations, in Pakistan violently storming the American embassy compound.
We're seeing coordinated attacks on U.S. diplomatic and military installations in Iraq.
But the most critical, immediate vulnerability, the true powder keg in the region, is Bahrain.
Right. Let's talk about Bahrain again, because the demographic reality there is a majority Shia population that is governed by a minority Sunni monarchy.
A monarchy that is intimately allied with the United States and hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet.
If that Shia majority, catalyzed by the events in Tehran, initiates a full-scale uprising against the monarchy, Bahrain could become the first American-aligned state to completely collapse from internal pressure.
But the global escalation cannot be contained to the Middle East. If we apply game theory to the broader international system, we see how intimately this theater is linked to the war in Ukraine.
Europe is cut off from Russian energy.
Because of the Ukraine conflict, Europe has been systematically severed from the flow of cheap Russian natural gas and petroleum. To compensate, they are now acutely, dangerously dependent on energy exports originating from the Gulf states.
If the Gulf collapses, if the Strait of Hormuz remains impassable and the desalination plants burn, Europe goes bankrupt.
The European economy does not merely enter a standard recession. It faces catastrophic insolvency. Industrial production halts, municipal power grids fail.
Because the stakes are literally existential, major European powers like Germany, France, and Britain are being forced to seriously consider direct military intervention in the Gulf theater.
And the game theory modeling of a European intervention yields a terrifying probability matrix.
If NATO-aligned European powers formally enter the conflict, it drastically increases the probability that both Russia and China will intervene on behalf of Iran.
China cannot afford to let its primary energy supplier be dismantled.
And Russia benefits immensely from the total depletion of Western military stockpiles.
If that threshold is crossed, this instantly ceases to be a localized regional conflict. It triggers a literal multi-theater world war.
Which dramatically brings us to the ultimate question, the nuclear question. If a sovereign nation is demonstrably losing an existential war, if they are facing the imminent collapse of their economy, the starvation of their population, or the deliberate balkanization of their territory, do they authorize the use of nuclear weapons?
That is no longer a rhetorical question. Based on the trajectories we've modeled today, we can confirm that option is actively on the table for multiple state actors involved in this conflict.
When the survival of the state is structurally threatened, the unthinkable rapidly transitions into a viable strategic option.
So let's synthesize the overarching analysis.
This brings us right back to our opening hook. Empires fall at the height of overconfidence. Why could this be the beginning of the end?
What we are currently witnessing is not a single point of failure. It is a perfect storm, the combination of massive vulnerabilities that have been willfully ignored.
It's an obsolete empire facing a lethal combination of factors. First, you have a physical geography that overwhelmingly favors Iran's defensive posture.
Second, you are trapped in a defense-bankrupting cost asymmetry. burning millions of dollars to intercept thousands of dollars of disposable hardware.
Third, you have a broken macroeconomic engine where the closure of the Strait of Hormuz chokes off the petrodollar recycling loop.
And finally, you are engaging an adversary driven by an unshakable, deeply ingrained religious motivation that fundamentally weaponizes your kinetic strikes.
You are turning assassinations into highly effective martyrdom recruitment drives. The U.S. military-industrial complex is just the wrong tool for the job.
It is an apparatus optimized for a bygone era. It was constructed for Cold War intimidation and spending money.
It was never intended to fight a poor, highly determined, religiously motivated enemy hiding in impassable mountain terrain with cheap drones.
We are deploying the wrong tools into the wrong geographic environment against an adversary whose fundamental motivations we consistently misunderstand.
And I think we both agree on this stark conclusion. This specific conflict may not be the war that abruptly ends America, but it is the war that starts the ending.
The world after this conflict will be fundamentally unrecognizable from the international order we inhabited just a week ago.
We have spent an hour dissecting the mechanics of this collapse, and yet, to you listening, you need to know this deep dive has only scratched the surface of a massive geopolitical shift.
The permutations of this event are continuously evolving, and that is precisely why we conduct these analyses independently.
Right. We want to emphasize the independent nature of this analysis. We operate without corporate sponsors, we have no institutional backing, and no political agenda.
Our sole objective is to sift through the academic literature, the verified reporting, and the rigid strategic frameworks to provide you with the unvarnished picture.
So if you found this valuable, if you want to help us keep producing these deep dives, and if you want access to exclusive, detailed, area-by-area regional breakdowns of what is happening on the ground,
Head over to buymeacoffee.com and at the world.
that's buymeacoffee.com and of the world. Your support is the only thing that keeps this level of analysis possible.
In our next deep dive of this series, we're going to delve even deeper into the specific game theory matrices and historical patterns governing the secondary players.
Because if the mechanics we unpacked today were eye-opening, I'm warning you, you haven't seen anything yet.
The models predicting the secondary escalation phase are genuinely staggering.
But for now, as you process the density of this information, we want to leave you with one final, lingering, chilling question to mull over.
Yeah.
If the very systems meticulously designed to project a superpower's absolute strength, its infinitely complex global supply chains, its trillion-dollar high-tech defense grids, and its deeply interconnected financial networks are the exact mechanisms that render it so fatally fragile in an asymmetric conflict.
Then is true power in the 21st century really defined by how much infrastructure you can build?
Or is it actually defined by how little you require to survive?